I'm going to take 3 more, and then depending on the time, I'm going to ask the speakers what the time pressures for them are. So 1, 2, 3.
Okay, my question has to do with real versus perceived intolerance, because I know acts of real intolerance and discrimination do take place, but there may also be times when certain religious groups, I'm not going to single out any, there may be some religious groups that are hypersensitive to criticism or having their privileges and rights limited, so they would cry out discrimination or intolerance every time, like even the slightest bit of criticism or limitation is applied to them, either directly or indirectly. And worse yet, there may even be some groups who take advantage of this to try and promote special interests for their group. Perhaps you could address that.
I'm not sure. I think maybe I'm not hearing you. There's some Canadian context to your question that I don't understand.
Maybe I'll jump in. You know, my own experience is that religious groups don't complain enough. That they feel that they are, especially newcomer minority religious groups, put up with discrimination and intolerance when they shouldn't. The Sikh community did gain a certain unpopularity among many Canadians well before the Air India disaster, because it was a group like the Jewish community that stood up for their rights more than other groups. And I think some of the legislation we have today that protects minority religious group rights comes out as a response to the very courageous efforts of the Sikh community, of the Jewish community, and others. But those two communities led for different reasons. But the members of the other groups haven't complained enough about religious intolerance and discrimination. And if you feel that a particular group may be complaining too much, well, they come before the courts on a case-by-case basis, and they have to prove their claim. That's why we have tribunals and courts, because we deal with these on a case-by-case basis rather than in a kind of general way.
I know there isn't a formula for this, but insofar as dealing with the conflict between religious rights and human rights, you discussed the side there on the liberal strain, the liberal religious perspectives, and every religion has its illiberal elements. So how do you deal with a situation where someone claims the right to discriminate against gays or against women on the basis of their religious creed? Conflict with rights. So how does one do that?
I don't think there's an answer to these questions. I think this is something that communities have to work out themselves. I just don't think there's an answer to them in a general sense.
I'm just going to agree that, yes, it's a process of dialogue, and a good place to start. The answer to that question is the special issue of Canadian diversity that was dedicated to the question of balancing rights, and the result of a long intellectual debate and dialogue, and one which would be far richer than any answer I could give.
I guess I would say, just to say one more thing, I think that rights talk is sometimes incredibly impoverished in terms of its capacity to take account of what human life is like. And I think, for my part, that really we are at a moment when we really need to sort of re-describe and reimagine human life rather than sorting out in this kind of hierarchical way, what trumps what at what particular moment.
My question is expanded to the actual laws that apply to criminal law and law of discrimination actually certain items of people feeling the right to.
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court today decided a case in which religion trumped human rights, lots of people would say. So, in which disability rights, so in religion trumped disability rights in the United States. Very important case. Troubling many people would find.
For many of us, oppression comes not from secular society unwilling to accommodate religious perspectives, but comes from religious groups wanting to legislate their religious perspective on others. And I would hope that part of the conversation over the next couple of days might also include what might be the proper boundaries around freedom of religion. How far does freedom of religion go? I know the previous conference that the Human Rights Commission had around competing rights, the explanation was that originally when freedom of religion was looked at in terms of human rights codes, it was really freedom of worship. And that gradually that has expanded over the years around religious holidays, etc. And so now we have freedom of religion that is undefined and has no boundaries. And increasingly the courts are deciding what the boundaries are. Can a church fire a janitor in a school system, what happens to the day, etc. And I was just wondering what work is being done around the issues of proper boundaries around freedom of religion.
The answer to that question in the U.S. today is yes, church fire a janitor.
So there are no boundaries around freedom of religion and work being done on what.
There are boundaries, but that's
I mean, yes, there are certainly boundaries. I mean, you can't claim the freedom of, you can't claim on religious basis that you're allowed to violate the criminal code, for example. I think we have to admit that in every historical period, there are limits to multiculturalism. There are limits to what we will tolerate. There are limits to what we will allow. There are limits always. And I think instead of a kind of easy multiculturalism in which we say, oh, it's all about diversity, there are no limits, or a rejection of multiculturalism, which is to say, okay, there's only one proper way to do things, we have to reestablish a dialogue. And I think the theme of dialogue here has been reiterated many times. It has to be a discussion, it has to be a negotiation. There has to be a recognition that the dialogue is happening very frequently between groups that are not on equal footing. Some are more powerful than others. But the only way to come to a consensus around what are the limits is through this kind of conversation and negotiation. And it has to be constantly renewed because society is constantly changing. So this won't be the last time the Ontario Human Rights Commission will have to update its policy on
We see updating our policies as being a regular process. And that we see right now there are, the speakers spoke about the definition. What is creed? What are we talking about? I mean, that's a starting point. But once there's some agreement on that, how far does that go? And the courts are looking at those issues in a number of cases right now, and I think it's very much open all parties of it. Sir, 2 and 3. Right down here. Sorry, no, right down. You, sir? You want to just pass the mic down? And then over here, and then...
My question is going to be completely different from all that you've heard. If we are talking of intolerance between faith or intolerance that I want to bring up is between faith and a secular society. And secular, I mean in a narrow sense of the term. The faith groups have got together and are working towards removing intolerance. And we have various faith groups that address any intolerance in any part of the world by protesting against that. We do that in the Toronto area in the Cape Town. What we are facing today is a different kind of intolerance, and I think, Barbara Hall, this comes right back into your court, both as the City of Toronto previous mayor and Human Rights Commission, that religions are now treated as second-class citizens. We have a zoning bylaw introduced by the City of Toronto which restricts places of worship from residential areas. It also restricts schools, but I'll just speak on the places of worship. It takes a faith group many years, an average is about 6 to 10 years, to get approval to build a new place of worship. And why is that happening? There is also that intolerance that should be looked at. And people forget that morals that came into the secular society or into society started with faith. It was the religious faith that started the moral essence of morality and brought it into the stage where it is now the practice in court or laws of society.
Well, I think you've asked the question, and it's now something that will be considered as a part of this whole review. I'm not sure that either of you to answer that. I don't know.
I think that might be a difference between the U.S. is less secular.
I don't know why zoning takes so long in Toronto. Maybe a former mayor could answer that question. These are complicated questions, and I did talk a little bit about how a closed secularism, in fact, can be a source of religious discrimination and intolerance of religious people. So it would fall under that broad category.
I think there are certainly many examples in communities across Canada as well in America, which I've read about, where communities have been in opposition to, sometimes within zoning bylaws and sometimes external to them. This is an issue, as I've said, that will be looked at as a part of this. It's possible for human rights commissions or individuals to challenge laws, and it may be that this is something that needs to be focused on and zoning laws challenged.
The zoning bylaw was changed, which restricted places of worship from residential areas. It's now being cancelled, and they're putting in a new zoning bylaw. So this particular part is going to remain in the new bylaw, and I think the Human Rights Commission should be addressing that.
Well, you put it on the menu for us, and thank you for that.